Hello, everybody. So, I have sort of a confession to make today, and this confession is that I have always secretly, and actually, I've never really sort of denigrated publicly, I don't think, to too great an extent, the character Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars. I've always secretly loved Jar Jar, and I've always found Jar Jar funny. Um, so this is going to be a video addressing this issue of racism or ostensible racism surrounding the character Jar Jar Binks in the Star Wars Phantom Menace film. And yeah, this issue was raised as being putatively, the character Jar Jar was putatively or supposedly a sort of a caricature of Afro-Caribbean men. And I do get that there's a sort of overlap between Jar Jar and characters like, say, Sanka from Cool Runnings. But this interpretation of the character I don't believe is tenable at all, and I don't believe that the character Jar Jar Binks is racist, frankly. And I think that this loose and lazy interpretation of the character fails to take into appreciation the wider context in which the character works within the film, and fails to appreciate that Jar Jar is one character whose voice I believe he is voiced by a black actor. He's one member of the race, the Gungans, in the Phantom Menace. The rest of whom seem pretty reasonable and like live in an underwater civilization society on the planet Naboo. And Jar Jar's been sort of exiled from the Gungan city for being clumsy, apparently, for breaking stuff too often. Whether or not we quite believe that necessarily, I don't know exactly. But yeah, like the other Gungans seem, yeah, sort of like rather like they got their shit together. They got cool underwater, sort of submarine ship things. Um, there's the boss Gungan guy, Boss Nass, is it played by Brian Blessed in Phantom Menace? He goes when he's like decided on something. Is yeah, like a little bit histrionic, possibly. That character, a bit kind of overblown, a bit theatrical, a bit pantomime, possibly. But yeah, there's no sort of mention of the other Gungans being caricatures of Afro-Caribbean men, is it? Yeah, and yeah, that their race seems pretty reasonable. It's not like an attack or a critique or a caricature of a given race. That interpretation is totally untenable because the other Gungans or plenty of Gungans seem normal, and reasonable, and not sort of uh, galumphing dolts like Jar Jar. And Jar Jar is great. He's a bit of comic relief. He gets his tongue stuck in the lightning beam thing on the pod racer, and like there's that thing where he like steals some food on Tatooine with his like long tongue goes and oh my. I love Jar Jar. I think he's brilliant. Yeah, I think he's like a fun character. Sure, a bit of comic relief. You don't need your Star Wars to be. There's enough seriousness in Star Wars. Like it touches on the issue of slavery, and it touches on issues of growing up and not knowing who one's father is, and of taking responsibility, and making like difficult decisions as a young kid really. Um, it's it focuses on the conflict between good and evil and the politics of it, and yeah, it is rather interesting. I've always liked the prequels, really, because I grew up with the prequels. The first Star Wars film I ever saw was Attack of the Clones, and so then went back and watched the Phantom Menace. Some later on, and then Revenge of the Sith. Was it Revenge of the Sith? Yeah. Yeah, I like those three films. I think they're good. And what? But on this issue of supposed racism in Star Wars films, I think actually proponents of that hypothesis are really putting themselves in a greater danger of endorsing racism by evoking this notion that Jar Jar corresponds to a caricature or stereotype of Afro-Caribbean men that doesn't actually exist so much. And it's commenting like this is drawn out of the fact that it's played by a black actor or voiced by a black actor, and that hence it's racism for some reasons. I think I remember also like in the Phantom Menace, like they got Samuel L. Jackson playing Mace Windu. So like, is it a slight against black people per se? I mean, Mace Windu, as we all know, is like very cool, a bit stern, very wise, incredibly proficient with a lightsaber, and yeah, like cool badass in space. So like, is this like racism against black people generally, or just against black people from the Caribbean? But then again, this whole Caribbean people idea, like, it doesn't really hold up very well to scrutiny, because like the other Gungans, they don't seem to be caricatures as well. That was more or less the bottom line. And people did exactly the same thing when A New Hope came out. As in, like, some people, oh, you must mean Arabs, surely. Like, well, I think it's like, well, this is hostile people living in the desert with guns, shooting people and going you must mean like, oh, those are actually like Bedouin Arabs you're trying to mock or something, is it? Or you're incorporating that sort of stereotype into that. It's not as though the people like accusing George Lucas of stereotyping Bedouin Arabs in this way know all that much at all about Bedouin culture, really, and like they're just sort of playing off a kind of an image possibly of Middle Eastern people, not necessarily Bedouins at all, that's been sort of propagated and promulgated in the media. So yeah, and there's like, the sound people Arabs, like, well, who are the Jawas then? Who are the other natives of Tatooine? Who is Jabba the Hutt or the Hutts? I assume they're natives of Tatooine also. What race do they correspond to? And then there's obviously this other one, like Watto, the former owner of Anakin Skywalker. There's like, oh, he's a Jew. He's a Jew? Like, he's like representing Jewishness? Like, I think actually in that sort of situation, the racism is on the people making that sort of statement. Like, you're just perpetuating the stereotype of Jewish people by trying to point out that this little sort of faintly like seedy sort of shop owner, businessman, like dodgy dealing gambler type is Jewish. I think like the racism is actually on your part. The people who like constantly trying to point out racism where it doesn't exist. Jewish. Like, is he all that obsessed with money? Is that it? Watto's like, yeah, I mean, I imagine money is a concern to him to some extent. Like, because you see Qui-Gon like haggling with Watto, and it's like, well, you're stereotyping Jewish people by making that inference. Like, why can't you just be a sort of a faintly seedy Tatooine type? But then, like, you come across other characters in it who they can't stereotype so easily. Like, and while we're on the subject, like Yoda, surely like Yoda is a parody of sort of the old Japanese Zen master type or whatever, and hence is a slight against Japanese culture. But then Yoda's not presented in a negative light, is he? As being a very positive, noble influence within the film. And Watto isn't Jewish. he's just crooked, shady, and double dealing. and shifty and seedy. That's all he is. Like, you do need a character like that to be the owner of Anakin Skywalker, because it's trying to make the point slavery is bad. It's a sort of, there's an abolitionist undercurrent that character acts as a narrative device to affect. Do you see that in much the same way, Jar Jar is a sort of character plot device element that allows certain things to happen, such as leading the sort of divergent tactic of the Gungans attacking the droid army and whatnot, and acting as a general eventually of all things. And yeah, he acts as comic relief because its demographic. The film is young, so it's not actually aimed at old Star Wars fans who started watching it in the 70s. Sorry, Boo sucks. In a shit. But Watto's Jewish. Is he? Is he really? I mean, he's a kind of like a Shylock-ish figure, is he? Like, I'm just trying to think of like stereotype Jewish characters from fiction. Shylock is the first one that obviously came to mind. Is he demanding a pound of flesh from anyone? Is he lending money or something? I don't believe he does lend money to anyone. He just sort of he's trying to sell, what is it, like a hyperdrive to Qui-Gon and Kenobi, because the one on their ship sort of fucked up. So he has the parts they need, and he's haggling and insisting on like the price for this, and he's got a loaded die because he's a cheat in gambling, and Qui-Gon does the Jedi hand thing and shifts it to the boy when he makes the deal with what the bet. Why is that a Jewish trait? Again, like the inference of suggesting the suggestion that Watto is Jewish is actually anti-Semitic, because it's nothing like to do with there's no clear usage of stock stereotypical anti-Semitic stereotypes or slurs in the character Watto. What it actually does, the suggestion that Watto represents Jewish people, and the whole issue of using a single character, like suggesting that a single character is intended to make a statement about an entire group of people or race of people, is totally flawed anyway. But I mean, suggesting that it's just like saying, oh, well, like Watto's shifty, double dealing, a cheat in gambling. These are Jewish traits, and this is and they're stereotyping Jewish people in that way in Star Wars, and that's anti-Semitism. Well, no, it isn't. You're being anti-Semitic by suggesting that it is. I mean, Jewish stereotypes, like, as I understand it, like more in the modern world, more like hypochondria, being not necessarily shifty, double dealing, and cheating, but more like being stingy. Really, that's and frugal. That's what like Jewish people are. That's more how they're stereotyped. I think, if anything, like any person from any race of people can be a cheat, seedy, double dealing, callous, and a cunt, and a crook. And being a crook, like that, is something that is possible with any race of people or any social group, or any like ethnic group. They're all capable of crime. So yeah, I mean this racism in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, the link there's like with Jar Jar, African Caribbean men or Caribbean men of African origin descent. It's the link. It is like it's like very tenuous at best. That's all it is. It's just it's such a it's like a tightrope made of a single human hair, leading from the character to the interpretation racism. And you know where all this stuff comes from? This need to sort of, I guarantee, I think, among white people, among certain white people, certain leftist liberal types, who just need to sort of to white knight, and to sort of show how anti-racist and progressive they are, and they need to sort of do it to sort of put themselves on an egotistical pedestal, and sort of actually rather narcissistically to pat themselves on the back for having supposedly like uncovered the racism in a story or something. Like, is Star Wars like on block racist towards like any kind of black people of any descent? I don't think like Lando Calrissian in the first in the original trilogy. I think he was the only black character, wasn't he? Lando. Who else? I got James Earl Jones doing the voice of Darth Vader. I don't think that quite counts since when Darth Vader is unmasked, like, he's quite clearly white. But then you got Mace Windu. Yeah, I mean Lando's pretty cool. He's a cool guy. Like, he does sort of double cross Han, but then again, it still does make the point. Like, Han, if you were in my situation, you'd do the same to me. And Han's like, yes, do sort of see what you mean, and then get back to becoming buddies again eventually. Yeah, Mace Windu is, like, generally speaking, a very, very cool character. His death is a little unfortunate though, and I dislike the fact he basically, like, Anakin, that he met his end at the hands of that piss weasel Anakin Skywalker, played by Hayden Christensen, who frankly, and this is to digress just a little bit, probably didn't deserve like the sort of amount of shit he got for his bad acting. And when it comes to lines like just so rough and coarse and it goes everywhere, it's like, yeah, you can sort of see him turning frankly into a bit of a narcissistic psychopath who's like sort of, yeah, very like whingy and angry, and this sort of like Byronic, almost like Milton Satan figure, this romantic entity who's got sort of like ideas of almost becoming like a godlike force or something like this, and sort of yeah, troubled and conflicted and actually very possibly hungry for power, and yeah, and yeah, I don't like that they bent to it, didn't they? They bent to this charge of racism that doesn't fucking exist. Like, there is a new race in Star Wars, the Gungans. You're being racist by we're suggesting that one thing, that Jar Jar Binks typifies Gungan society, that he's been cast out of it for being a klutz, for being a fool, which is, like, and all races, by the way, they have fools among them, or don't they? So, and then it might even get people that say, oh, our race is like, none of us are foolish. We're the smartest people, none of us are fools. And then, like, well, you're a supremacist for whatever race you belong to, and hence racist. But there we go. Yeah, and I'd like to see a bit more Jar Jar, frankly, in Attack of the Clones. I think it could have done with it because the Attack of the Clones was, yeah, possibly a little bit unnecessarily po-faced in places, but very cool also. That's some pretty good lightsaber scenes and like way cool like droid clone combat and Jango Fett. That's very cool. Introduction of Jango Fett into so the origins of Boba Fett, which a lot of people wanted to see. That's quite good. What else was good about that? Jar Jar Binks is not racist and an enjoyable, funny character. He's a good little sideshow. And he is. What is he? He's a boob. He's a doll, a fool, a clown. And like, say you have like a black character in a film who is foolish. Why can't you do that as a white writer director? If Jar Jar is even meant to be black at all, as opposed to a fucking Gungan, which is more like what he's supposed to be. Yeah. And yeah. Where does this come from? This like hop, skip, and a jump. Like it comes out of like a pathetic and wheedling and narcissistic and pandering and patronising desire to weed out racism wherever it exists or doesn't exist for people's own self-aggrandisement and to score social brownie points, and it's nothing more than that. But I mean, yeah, like, yeah. Anyway, I think I made my point roughly on this one. So thank you everyone for watching. Bye bye. I love you lots. And yeah, like, please stop doing this, like, atrocious, like, horrible social game to try and acquire, like, a little, like, bit of, like, social prestige or whatever. But go, oh, look how anti-racist I am. I just go, like, pointed out that this was racist. Like, stop it. It doesn't make you look clever at all. Like, if someone's, like, actually yelling racial abuse at someone, or if like someone's like saying something that is openly and seemingly intentionally racist, by all means attack them for it, and by all means denigrate them for it, and try and prevent them from persisting in their bigoted tirade. But you know, like, this idea that racism lies just beneath the surface in art and literature and films like fucking Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. Like, very often you enter into like a slippery, tenuous, thin interpretation, loose interpretation, and a lazy interpretation of something that doesn't hold up to much scrutiny. And actually, by the way, also, more importantly, trivializes racism. And, so, yeah, makes it seem, well, it's as though you're not really taking the issue of racism that seriously. You're going to level a charge, you know, that serious against a writer and a director of a film. And, not, like, really scrutinize your opinion objectively and honestly. And yeah, that's about all I have to say. So thank you everyone for watching. I love Jar Jar Binks. I think he's brilliant. Bye everyone. I love you lots.